So many prospects are turning heads at this year's NFL scouting combine. We're going to start with the skill guys because that's what we do on Locked On Bengals. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're on the Locked On Podcast Network on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you're new to the show, ready to gear up for the draft, ready to gear up for free agency, which is just a week away, depending on when you're listening to this episode and the start of the legal tampering period, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast. Become an everydayer here on Locked On Bengals, our busiest time of year, believe it or not, coming up in the off season here. This tends to be when the most action happens, especially next week when free agency is going on. And we're going to get into some combine standouts today, starting with the skill guys. And there is a ton that we will get into this week between massive, freaky offensive linemen and some of the most athletic position groups we've seen at the combine in quite some time. And I'm going to rant at some point this week about the way the NFL times the agility drills, because nobody does agility anymore in Indianapolis, and it's something that I would really like to see. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, where you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And James, what position out of the skill positions would you like to start with, and why is it wide receiver?
Yeah, well, of course it's wide receiver. I'll give you 4.21 reasons why. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Congrats to Worthy in breaking John Ross's record. And we can get into all these receivers real quick. We are recording this on Sunday as the offensive linemen are testing. We do care. We know it's a freakish class. We also want to get this show out to you and kind of go in order. And I think as of right now, the biggest noteworthy thing is all of these skill guys. And I think why it should be wide receiver is because I think the Bengals are pretty much in that. You may disagree. I think they're going to take a wide receiver on the first 2 days of the draft with one of their first 3 picks. Now, I think running back is a highly, almost more debated topic, certainly here in Cincinnati. So I don't necessarily know if we should start with wide receiver. We can plan on the fly. I'm going to actually switch it though. The wide receiver guy wants to go running back because I think there are a lot of dudes in this class that can help the Bengals and not be necessarily bell cow backs. I don't think the Bengals need to be built around one back or even 2 backs. And looking at the way the Bengals are draft-wise, the way they're positioned with a couple of compensatory selections, a bunch of day 3 selections, I could see them. We've seen them double dip in the past. Last year it was wide receiver. I could see them double dipping. A cornerback too, they double dipped. I could see them certainly double dipping at running back this year because I just think there are going to be guys hanging around on day 3 that make a lot of sense to them or that are athletic enough to where they look at it and say it's worth a dart throw.
So we're starting with running back.
Yes. How about that?
Okay.
Twist.
Last minute pivot.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the running back class is interesting. To me, I don't know how much the running back class really elevated itself to me at the combine yesterday. There were a couple names that are very interesting, a couple of smaller school guys or smaller volume guys or less hyped guys that I think are going to require us to go back and look at them, especially for some day 3 guys. Isaac Guerendo from Louisville, the biggest example of one of those coming out just shy of the most athletic running back testing of all time. And he did that at like 220, which is bananas. 6 foot 221, ran a 4.33, jumped 41 and a half inches high, jumped almost 11 feet in the broad. I mean, absolutely freaky stuff from Guerendo. But the reason that nobody's talked about him yet is, well, one, partially is where he went to school at Louisville, and 2, he had some significant injuries. So you look at these athletic testing scores, and then you have to remember that, you know, it's a lot more than just the way they test. And typically the way that teams are using these athletic testing numbers is to confirm what they thought they saw on tape or force them to go back to the tape and look to see if these traits show up. And for Guerendo, I can tell you they do. at Louisville. The breakaway speed is real for him. But go back to our first conversation about the draft on this show, James, with Mike Renner a few weeks ago. And he said that there were, 4 or 5 running backs in this class that he had graded higher than Chase Brown, who he had a 4th round grade on last year.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that that's really changed for me after the combine. Jalen Wright, Trey Benson, I think, solidified themselves in that spot. And then Brooks from Texas, another one that I think is certainly going to be graded more highly for most teams, including non-teams like Mike Renner than Chase Brown. But who else really, really moved the needle in terms of boosting their draft stock? I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's going to be interesting to feel that out over the next couple of weeks.
I think that's fair. And let's just say that's the case. Good. Because I think there are a lot of day 3 options.
Yes.
And that's probably where the Bengals should be at running back anyways. Like to me, when you hear that, you're like, oh, well, there's only a few guys there's not going to be a 1st round running back.
No.
There's only going to be so many day 2 guys. That's fine. Everyone listening is like, yeah, offensive tackle, defensive tackle, maybe wide receiver, tight end on day 1 and day 2 anyways. I think there are guys that can contribute that they can find on day 3, much like they did with Chase Brown last year. And it's when I look at this running back class, I don't think it's bad enough. Let's just make it about the conversation that's at hand. I look at this free agent class and who could be available veteran wise. And heck, over the weekend, Ian Rappaport said it's arguably the deepest free agent running back class in NFL history. I didn't go back and look at every free agent class, but with Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, feels like Derrick Henry, all these guys are going to hit free agency.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that. So when you have that and a bunch of guys underneath there that the Bengals could target, by the way, I'm not saying the Bengals should target that. Plus I look at just the day 3 options, but guys that could go late day 2. Like I think Braylon Allen could be on the radar. You mentioned Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Estime from Notre Dame. And Estime, because he ran a 4.7, might be there at pick 115. And so if you could get him in round 4, and then you come back and get one, Bucky Irving falls because a lot of people had him round 3, but the testing, I think he's going to drop. I just
He hurt himself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so could he be there round 5? Like, all right, round 6 for one of these guys. Like there's a decent chance that happens too. So I think there are so many options that I come back to, is Joe Mixon a good value or not? And that kind of solidified it for me. Like, give me the 6.1 million in cap room. And whether it's free agency, whether it's this draft class, I think the Bengals can put together a more than capable running back room around Chase Brown, because I do think that they need to overhaul it. I do think they need to be more explosive. And I think they can find their way towards that, even though moving on from someone that's been here since 2017 is hard.
Why did it change to 6.1? Wasn't it like 5.75 for the longest time for Mixon? Did he hit some escalator?
Yeah, it says it's 6.1. It may be 5.8. Because that's the number I've seen too. Because what it is it's that 8.85, and then it's a $2.7 million dead cap. So that's where people get the 6.1. And depending on the site you look at, maybe he did. Maybe
he hit an escalator or something like that, because it was for the longest time. There's an other bonus here of $350,000 that maybe is where the difference is coming from, because it was 2.27 or 5.75 for the longest time.
And even so,
interesting.
Let's just say it that it is that, though. I'm not trying to mislead our listeners here. Let's just say it's 5.5, and it's not. It's more than that. I still think there's value in doing that, and part of it is because of all these different guys that can play a role. Ray Davis out of Kentucky. I know a lot of people there are guys that can play a role right away, even though you're not taking them in round 2. Even though the Bengals have had a lot of luck with round 2 running backs, I don't think they'll necessarily be in play for one this year.
Yeah, free agency would have to go a very particular way for them to feel like they could use a 2nd round pick on a running back, or they would have to have another 2nd round pick, I think. And they're Trey Benson. I mean, that's the 2nd round running back right there, if I've ever seen one. From the productivity to the way he tested, ran a much faster than expected time. Really liked the way that Jalen Wright tested as well. Tested like the elite athlete that he is. We didn't unfortunately get testing for Braylon Allen, for Will Shipley, as far as I know. So there are some guys that we still need to wait for pro days on, if they are able to test at pro days as well. But a deep free agency class, a draft class that at least has some guys, not crazy depth, but there are some guys at least that are very interesting there. Makes the Bengals decision making at running back interesting as well. But can't believe we just didn't lead with wide receivers. We do need to talk about the wide receivers because this is a stacked wide receiver class, as we know. We'll go there coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And FanDuel is America's number one sports book. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And, well, a free $150 if you win. It's pretty simple. You go in to the app, you look at the NBA matchups if you want to wager on the NBA, and they have quick bets. They have same game parlays. You can bet live in game. So, for example, on Saturday night, when the Lakers jump out to a lead on Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets, and I know darn well that the Nuggets are going to handle business, well, I just go into the FanDuel app and I live bet the Denver Nuggets to beat the Lakers. Well, that's easy money. So if you want to get in on the action, which why wouldn't you? Go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. College hoops and the tournament right around the corner. NBA, obviously. NFL draft around the corner. Maybe you want to get in on the Bengals future Super Bowl odds. You can do all of those things with FanDuel at FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
This is an exciting wide receiver class. And
Yes.
It's not just athleticism. You can go back to 2023, and that was a crazy athletic wide receiver class too. But this year, they come in all shapes and sizes. You got a record setter in the 40 that you mentioned at the top of the show, James. And to go with all of that, you've got productivity. So it's not just one or the other this year. This class is deep in guys that show skill on tape, have good productivity metrics to back it up, and then go out and test like a freak. And A.D. Mitchell from Texas testing like the best athlete this year, followed by Brian Thomas Jr., a couple of guys that I think solidified their position in the draft. And we're going to see a lot of wide receivers go on day one this year.
No doubt. I think that's the interesting element here is how many go and how many go before 18. Brian Thomas, to me, is officially in the 18 conversation. Now, does that mean they're going to take Brian Thomas? No, everyone relax, because there's a good chance that he's gone. He's already picked. And that's what he did, because to me, really good contested catch guy. He slot fade, the thing we see with T. Higgins, he's done that. He's certainly the speed was there at LSU when you watch him, and then it translated. And he's running 4.3, and at his size doing that, I could certainly see a team in the top 17 picks taking him. And who knows who it is? Maybe it's the Colts at 15. Maybe it's the Jaguars at 17. Two teams that would make a lot of sense. Maybe he goes earlier. But I do think a lot of these mocks have had 3 wide receivers go before the Bengals are on the clock. I don't think that's going to be the case. There's going to be at least a 4th. And it's because there's so many, and there's going to be a run. And if you're a team drafting in the top 17, who's going to be there in round 2? Do you want to risk losing? Because the idea of Ladd McConkey, for example, being there for the Bengals at pick 49 or being there for the Jaguars at 48, that's gone. I don't think it's there. I think he's going to be long gone. There's going to be a team that scoops him up probably on day 1, maybe early day 2, pretty early. Like, he'll be the guy, if he makes it out of round 1, that everyone's talking about. Oh, will the 33rd pick, will they trade back? Will someone move up and get that? Like, that'll be one of those guys, and where the discussion is. So there's a bunch of guys, and Xavier Worthy. I got to admit, I haven't watched him yet, but I think he ran himself into round 1. Where does he go? Our good friend from Locked On Cowboys mentioned him at 24. Could he go that early? Could he be that home run threat for Dak Prescott that they're looking for opposite CeeDee Lamb? I think there will be teams that are in on him as well. And the question is obviously about the weight. He weighs $165. He weighs in at Jake Liscow weight, and that's tough to do in the NFL.
On a good day for me. Yeah. But my weight don't play in the NFL is what I told you. Even if you are the fastest man, that's tough. And I'm sure
you have to be the outlier. You have to be Deshaun Jackson. You really do.
and you
That's
can.
really tough.
It
Yeah.
has happened. I'm not saying he can't do it. To be clear, it's just harder. It's just harder when you're giving up that much weight to everybody else on the football field, except Nate Wiggins, who that would be a fine matchup. Nate Wiggins and Xavier Worthy, that'd be fun. We're not talking about corners in depth today, but he had a disappointing weigh-in, even though he ran extremely fast. But to your point, I think the biggest impact for the Bengals is probably a lot of the guys you were hoping for if you were hoping for a second round wide receiver. And many of you, I can hear you, are saying trenches. Why are you guys we'll get to trenches. I promise you. We're waiting for the offensive line testing. We're recording this before all the offensive line testing has occurred. We'll go there tomorrow. We'll talk about the defensive trenches as well. But if you're one of the people out there who isn't yelling at us about talking about skill guys today and is open to the possibility of a second round wide receiver, then you got to kind of look at this list of the way guys tested, look at their productivity, think about the way teams are going to value these traits and wonder, to your point, James, who is going to be available in the second round. Because now we're talking about, instead of the names you just mentioned, instead of the outside chance of one of these guys makes it to the Bengals second round pick, you're probably talking about hoping that Ricky Pearsall is still there after the day he had and the productivity he had, despite his age and the showing he had at the Senior Bowl. Or you're talking about one of the secondary options of Washington who wasn't Rome Odunze, who was so determined to run a 3-cone the way he wanted to run a 3-cone. He was the last prospect on the field, which was a great story and shows the character he has. And then you got to think about, maybe who hurt himself. Keon Coleman running a pretty slow 40, but had a really good 10-yard split and jumped really well and still has good size. And Troy Franklin, who struggled through the gauntlet, didn't run quite as fast or test quite as well as you might have hoped for a guy that was getting mocked in the first round to some teams. And maybe he's now in the conversation for the second round. And then are you still comfortable with those guys in the second round? Or there's Xavier Legette, the freak athletes who are a little bit robotic, a little bit awkward. Do you think that they can put it together and be a complete receiver at the next level if that's the kind of thing you're thinking about? But I think that's where the impact is some guys, I think, help themselves and push themselves up. Some conversation around threatening the first round receiver record. I don't personally necessarily see that happening. I think there's too many other positions that will be in the first round, but a lot of really good receivers in this class that then went out and tested really well and really helped themselves. And there are a number of examples of that we talked about. I think A.D. Mitchell from Texas is the biggest example of that.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably in the first round now, at the back end of the first round now, but it's a freaky good, athletic wide receiver class. And like I said, the biggest difference between last year and this year is that these guys also produced in college.
Yeah. And Troy Franklin, it's interesting because as you were describing that, I'm like, all right, well, T didn't test the best. Chad Johnson, once upon a time, didn't test the best. And both of those guys were hoping to test better, and then they fall to the second round. And the Bengals obviously thrived with both. Mm-hmm. And so Franklin, a completely different player. I'm not saying that. He weighed in at $176. He's just different. Yeah. He's one of these speedy guys. But I don't think the Bengals will completely ignore everything else with these guys. And so it is interesting because someone will be there. All of these wide receivers that tested well aren't going to just go. I think what the Bengals are looking for in a wide receiver is someone that can do a little bit of everything. They don't necessarily need, and I tweeted this on Sunday, they don't need the 6'4", 215 guy because Brian Thomas is the easiest one. A.D. Mitchell, you could also mention, but there's like, oh, well, there's T's replacement. They don't need that. And I think they realize they don't need that. What I think they want is a versatile outside threat that could move into the slot, move all around, and help be a quality option in the offense. And that's hard to find, that versatility, because if you're looking for just a slot only, Ricky Pearsall might be the top guy. And who knows, maybe he could play outside and they view it that way. Ladd McConkey could be T. Higgins's replacement, even though he's not 6'4", because he could be an outside threat. And I think they'd probably view him that way. I think that's why he'll go first round, by the way, because the NFL would view him that way. So it is interesting. And then there is Xavier Worthy. I'm excited to watch Xavier, but I do think he will be gone before pick 49. And I'm not sure he ran his way into consideration at pick 18. I'm just not sure about that at 165. One more thing on receiver, and then we can get into Dax Hill as well, because, well, we have comments from Lou Anarumo on Dax Hill. We will do that coming up next. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? Would you keep watching Xavier Worthy run the 40-yard dash? Well, that wouldn't take a lot of time, and that might have been a bad joke, but the point is the best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule, what you want to do, and maybe that is draft prep and learning about all of these prospects and getting ready for the offseason. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it, so you can prioritize what matters most to you. So if you've ever thought about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, completely flexible, allows you to do all of the things you need to do and want to do because of the flexibility. Whether you have to go to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine, whether you travel regularly for work and live out of a suitcase, well, that's okay, because BetterHelp gives you the flexibility to do that and also have therapy in your life and make that a big part of your life. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time. All you have to do is visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
You got one more wide receiver note, James.
Yeah, I wouldn't completely dismiss Franklin at 176. I wouldn't completely dismiss Xavier Worthy at 165 on the Bengals board. I think they like the playmaking ability of some of these small guys. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily take them, but I don't think they hated Tank Dell, for example, and he had some success. We've seen these guys come in, the Boston College kid last year for the Ravens, come in, and they're not the biggest guys, but adding speed to this offense is certainly something the Bengals are open to. So I wouldn't completely dismiss those guys, even though they may go earlier than the Bengals hope or want to take them.
Zay Flowers.
Zay Flowers. Yeah. Couldn't think of his name. Don't dismiss those guys. That's all.
And the interesting thing there is, are they on the same page organizationally? Because for the longest time, the Bengals have had a type, and how strictly they stick to those types. Because there are some positions where we know that certain people in the building like certain players, and then others didn't, and there's been some disagreement and some non-consensus or difficult consensus forming, difficult board stacking. So it's interesting to see how that continues to develop as the coaching staff continues to kind of become entrenched in what they like and change with new voices in the room. And the front office is what it is. That group hasn't changed for a few years now. Real quick on tight ends before we go to Dax Hill. Theo Johnson tested like an absolute freak. I think need to think about that with the 10.00 RAS, the most athletic tight end ever, 6'6", 260, ran a 4.58 40 with a good 10-yard split, really great jumps as well, and was a guy that I think Mike Renner mentioned as a standout tight end. Ben Sinnott also testing well. Jaheim Bell testing reasonably well, ran reasonably fast. Jatavion Sanders with a bit of a disappointing 40-yard dash time. If you were to ask me, thought he would be a little bit better than he was, even though it was still an above average 40-yard dash for Sanders, but at his size and for the way he plays, was hoping for a little bit better there. And the last note for me on tight ends is Brock Bowers, who did not test, is waiting for his pro day. Reportedly was not impressive with teams, according to, I think, Pete Prisco. So something that I wonder how much of that is real versus how much of that is, hey, Pete, we didn't like Brock Bowers very much. Let's spread that around to was it Pete Prisco? Let's push him down the draft boards a little bit. But we'll wait to see how Brock Bowers tests. He weighed in well, but then he didn't run. So how much of that weight is real?
Fair. I also think that Brock Bowers is an awful interview. I think he's an awful prospect, and I don't think anyone in the top 17 should take him.
Correct.
There you go. No one in the top 17 should take him. And the Bengals, well, they should have to settle for Brock Bowers with all these awesome weapons. See, after all that, after all these receiver talk, after all the running back, tight end, if Brock Bowers is there at 18, baby, that might be one of the easier picks in franchise history for me. We'll see how he tests at Georgia's pro day, but I think he'll be just fine.
Pretty
I bet
excited.
he won't weigh in though. I bet he won't weigh in though.
No, yeah. The weight is a little fake, perhaps. Given that he didn't run, but we'll see. Let's talk about Dax Hill. The bottom line, as we're not done with our combine chatter yet, we're going to come back to the combine, of course, is that I'm pretty excited for pick 18. We haven't even talked about the offensive lineman yet. There are a lot of really good players the Bengals are going to be able to pick from at pick 18. We didn't talk about the corners very much, but there should be a good group there. Meanwhile, between Duke Tobin, Zach Taylor, Lou Anarumo, we cannot get the Bengals to tell us what Dax Hill's going to do. And reportedly, the Bengals are going to be active in the safety market and free agency, according to Kelsey Conway. So, what does that mean for Dax
And
Hill's
James
future?
Rapine. Way to read allbengals.com. It's all right.
Look, people tell me who reports things, and then I'm like, okay, I'll credit the person that I was told reported it. And James Rapine from allbengals.com. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. You should check out his site. It's a mom and pop operation.
That's so funny. Well, mom and pop are certainly open to safety. I don't think they're going to spend big at safety though. Like, I don't think they're going to go call Xavier McKinney and say, here's 10 million per or whatever the case is.
They're not signing Antoine Winfield Jr.?
Correct. Even though, by the way, they liked him a lot pre-draft.
Yeah.
They took T over him, for those wondering. So it's not like they got it wrong, but they liked him a lot pre-draft. But go ahead.
Dax's future.
Yeah, no, I think they would ideally add a safety and be able to use Dax in a bunch of different ways. But the thing that Lou, and this is where it's tough, if you're not going to spend big there, and Lou made it clear that they want Dax to master something. As good as he is at all these other things, he can do all these things because of his athleticism. He's got to get good at something. And so you got to put him somewhere and keep him there. And I do wonder how that works. Are they willing to go more 3 safety looks? I don't think that's realistic. I really don't. A lot of people have thrown that out there. They're paying both their linebackers. Okay. So we talked a lot about the 3 safety looks when Dax was a rookie, and that didn't really happen. And so I do wonder there, could Jordan Battle just play a little less and it be a 3 safety platoon? Maybe, if you find the right veteran. So I do think they're open to it. I think it will be on their to-do list. I also think it's much easier said than done because defensive tackle, if you ask Lou, is going to be a much higher priority. I think right tackle will be a priority, and those should be bigger priorities than safety. And so I think the market will dictate it some. There are a lot of free agent safeties out there. Can they find the right one? They thought they did last year in Nick Scott, and that didn't work out. So we'll see if they do this year.
Yeah, I think that is part of it. But you look at Lou Anarumo's tenure, they've had a specialist type at DB throughout most of his years in Cincinnati. They've brought in a third safety. They've brought in a tight end matchup corner. And if they want Dax to specialize in that role, then maybe that's where your 3 safety looks happen, is when you want Dax to man up a tight end. And that could be where they look at it. But it will be interesting to see how much money they spend there for a rotational guy. Historically, that third guy has not been a big expenditure. It's been in the $1.5 to $2 million range, and it's been short-term contracts. So, what player fits that bill is the question. And it is a very deep safety class. You could do what the Chiefs did and go get a former Chief and Mike Edwards, for example. That would be someone who might fit the bill. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're out there looking at, Cameron Curl and Xavier McKinney, like you said, or like even Geno Stone, who earned himself some money last year.
And Mike Edwards, like that level, that tier, if you think he fits, that makes a lot of sense to me because of where I think they should be putting their resources. If you look at the roster, you've been on this. You don't want to pay a lot for average. And they have to get cheap somewhere. That's part of my running back logic. It's why at tight end, I don't necessarily think they're going to spend a ton. Maybe they do and spend at the top of the market of this free agent class. I'm not sure if they do. You got to get cheaper in certain places. And so it's really hard for me to say, all right, well, you decided to get cheap there last year, and now you're going to go spend there to fix it. It sounds great, but then there's going to be a hole somewhere else. So I don't want to cheap out at right tackle, and and it's going to cost more. You're going to have to sign multiple defensive tackles, whether it's Reeder and someone else or just multiple new faces. It's a lot to juggle, and I think safety should be lower on the list. Doesn't mean you don't get one, but priority wise, I think the trenches have to be pretty high up there.
And Lou Anarumo talking several times during his interview about wanting DJ Reeder back as well. And
Yep.
so that bears watching. Lou doesn't always get what he wants, obviously. Talked about it being a dark day if both safeties left last year and then both safeties left. So Lou doesn't always get what he wants, but he really values DJ Reeder. Even went so far as to correct, I don't remember who asked the question. Maybe it was Kelsey. Correct someone speaking about DJ Reeder in the past tense, because he is technically still on the team for a few more days before free agency hits. So Dax's future, very interesting. What they do in free agency might educate us in that department. But when you spend a first and a third round draft pick at safety, a non-premium position, by the way, you don't really want to go spend a bunch of money there too, because that's just a lot of resources to spend at one spot, especially a spot where you don't necessarily need to be deep the way you need to be deep at corner or defensive line, or you want to be deep at offensive line or wide receiver, these more premium positions. It's a resource allocation issue there as well. And so I think the Bengals' behavior in free agency, which is very, very soon, it really snuck up on us, it feels like. I think that'll tell us a lot about Dax's future. But that's going to do it for this episode. We'll talk more about the trenches tomorrow, I promise you, with some of these offensive linemen that are testing, defensive linemen that tested earlier in the week, and that remains a priority for the Bengals for sure. We're seeing, as we record this, some broad jumps come in for the offensive line that are going to be fun to talk about, in addition to the rest of the athletic testing we see from that group. Until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.